Okay, so we're going to talk about diabetes and PKU right now. Now, I want you to, we're going to only focus on type 1 diabetes, and we're really just going to focus on the differences or this unique things, special things that we need to focus on, particular to pediatrics. The pathophysiology of diabetes is not different in adults and pediatrics, and I know that you've already covered diabetes in adults, so we're not really going to focus on that. I really just want to go over some things that are really um, specific to pediatrics. So I'm not going to go through the whole pathophysiology of diabetes with you. I did put in here because I do want you to make sure that you review the types of insulin and their peak time, their onset and their peak times, and kind of know their durations. Really, the onset and peak are kind of the things that you need to know most about. I put this chart in here for you, and it may be a little bit different than what you've seen before, um, because depending on what resources you use, you're going to find different times. This information came straight out of LexiComp, and I used that resource because LexiComp is kind of the standard drug text, if you will, that we use when we're using our electronic medical medication administrations in the hospitals, and LexiComp gets its information direct from the manufacturers. So this information that you're seeing here comes straight from the manufacturers of the various insulin producers. So it may look different. This information may look a little different than what you have already kind of learned, and that's okay. Don't freak out about that, and don't try to just memorize all of these specific times. Just kind of know that if you're talking about rapid acting insulins, they act rapidly and they peak pretty quickly within an hour to 2 hours for most of them, and they don't last super long. And your short acting insulins are a little bit longer, intermediate a little bit longer, and your long actings can last a really long time. So kind of just know that in your head so that you can kind of expect when they're going to kick in, when they're going to peak, and when you can expect, that hypoglycemic episodes might occur, or when they might need to eat in relation to that. Um, Special considerations that I want you to kind of be aware of. Insulin or glucose levels are going to fluctuate in times of illness, in relationship to exercise. That you should already know, and that does not change in relationship to pediatrics or adults. And so insulins may need to be adjusted. You may need less when you're exercising. You may need less if you're eating, when you're not eating. When you are stressed or ill, you may need more. You may need more insulin. You may need less. It kind of depends on what's happening. But here's the other thing specific to pediatrics. When kids start going through puberty, everything goes a little wacko. And so insulin doses may need to increase because glucose levels tend to increase during puberty. I want you to be aware, and I've put this chart in here for you, of developmental approaches. So we've talked a lot about what's happening with kids developmentally during these different stages. So think about things as they are starting to gain autonomy. What can you do for a toddler who's gaining autonomy and has diabetes? What can they do to help with that disease management? So things like giving them choices. Do you want to have a carrot or a celery stick? Maybe not their best choices. Maybe that's not what they want, but those are at least choices that they can participate in. Same thing with preschoolers. Elementary school kids, they can start help with meal planning. They can start helping with meal preparations and things like that. They can start to help with giving their injections. So this is going to give you some ideas of things to help you figure out how you can help get the children doing developmentally appropriate things to be involved with their disease management. So kind of go through this chart and look at some of those things on how you can get kids developmentally appropriate strategies to get them involved. I do want to, we've talked a lot about adolescents and body image and how they don't want to be different from their friends, that whole thing being a huge issue. That really leads to some non-compliance issues, not just with diabetics, but with lots of disease management problems. So non-compliance can be a big issue. Care contracts are really important with these kids. Drawing up a contract, just like you would with anything. You're going to buy a house. You're going to, do any kind of a contract where you say, okay, I'm going to do this. I'm going to monitor your A1C levels. I'm going to provide you with proper snacks. I'm going to do whatever, and you're going to be responsible for checking your blood glucose, giving your insulin, eating so many carbs, 70 carbs per 70 grams of carbs per day, whatever, and you actually have the adolescent sign the contract, agree to it, and making them actually accountable for their care. That actually gives the adolescent a sense of responsibility and makes them feel like they are grown up. It makes them accountable. It makes them accountable for what they're doing. And it really gives them this sense of, okay, I'm grown. This is my thing and I'm taking this on. And it really works to help them be compliant. By about 16, most adolescents start to be really well accountable, responsible for their diabetes care. They're still going to need some supervision from their parents, but by this time they are pretty well handling their disease process by themselves. Driving is another big issue in adolescence. Once they start driving, these kids need to learn that they need to be very well aware of what's happening with their glucose levels. They start getting taught that they need to check their glucose levels before they start driving. And sex education and using protection becomes a very important thing. That is the gist beyond just your basic patho and how to manage diabetes. I also want to mention one thing. Make sure that you know your signs and symptoms of hypo and hyperglycemia. There's a very good chart in your book, chart 30.7 in your textbook. So if you need to look over those signs and symptoms, go see that chart. I want you to be aware, we already talked about this with congenital adrenal hyperplasia, DKA. These children, more often than not, when they are in DKA, they will present in shock. So make sure that you are aware of what that looks like. Why do they present in shock? And what does that look like? And what are we going to do about that? We'll talk about that in class. So make sure that you're ready to discuss that and what that's going to look like so that we can talk about that in class. Okay, the last thing we're going to talk about is phenylketonuria, or PKU, and this is a genetic disorder it's a disorder of metabolism, which basically interferes with the body's ability to use protein. The reason this is important is because if it's not detected and treated early, if we cannot use protein properly, we cannot develop. Our brains cannot develop, and it will lead to brain damage and developmental delay. And what happens is these children can display behaviors much like those along the autism spectrum disorder. So we do screening for these in the newborn screening testing, because we want to pick this up very early so that we can treat it. Basically, the way that this is treated is through diet, and these children and these people, because this is a lifelong treatment, they're treated with diet that is low in anything that contains phenylalanine. So basically, their diet is low in protein and it's low in anything that contains aspartame, which now is a very big deal. Aspartame is an artificial sweetener, and we have that in uh, everything that we eat, basically. So foods that are low in that. And this little bullseye chart right here shows you, so the closer you get to the bullseye, the best foods they are for you to eat. So vegetables, fruits, um, those are the best things for you to eat. There are some breads that are low in protein that are okay. So the further out you get, the worse. Those are the not so good choices. You want to do those in moderation. So fruits and vegetables, there is a formula that can be that they can drink, low phenolac. Carbs, some carbs are okay. So be familiar with what's on this, so that you know what kind of meal choices might be good for people with PKU. And that is basically what we're going to cover in in our endocrine system. And we're going to, like I said, we'll apply that when you get to class on Monday, and I will see you then.